3 moments can change your whole life when you least expect it, and you never know which quiet choice will open a hidden truth. And sometimes the person standing beside you carries a story they have not spoken for years. The night before everything shifted, Sandra Bullock sat alone in her living room with the soft glow of a single lamp beside her. She felt tired in a way she did not always understand, a mix of gratitude and heaviness that came from balancing memories and responsibilities and silent hopes she never said out loud. She looked at the empty script pages on the table and wondered why her thoughts kept drifting to Keanu, even though she had been telling herself for years that she should not think that much about him. He had his life, she had hers, and even though they respected each other deeply, there were things neither of them had ever tried to explore. And at that same moment, miles away in his quiet home, Keanu Reeves sat on the floor with a map spread out in front of him. He did not tell anyone about the plan he had been forming for the last few weeks, not even his closest friends. He wanted to do something kind, something gentle, something that would give Sandra a little space to breathe. She had been running non-stop with interviews and projects, and he had seen the tiredness in her eyes during their last meeting. It was not the kind of tiredness that came from lack of sleep, but the kind that came from a heart carrying too much. Keanu could see things like that because he had carried such things too. He looked at the map, traced a line with his finger through the mountains, and whispered something soft to himself, as if trying to gather courage. It was not easy to plan something meaningful without feeling nervous, but he wanted this trip to give Sandra the peace she deserved. He told himself he just wanted to do a kind thing for a friend, but there was a deeper feeling inside him that he did not fully understand yet. All he knew was that he could not ignore it anymore. The next morning, Sandra woke up to a message from Keanu. It appeared on her phone with a gentle chime, and the moment she saw his name, her heart gave a small jump. She tried to act like it was no big deal, but inside she felt something warm rise in her chest. The message said he was outside waiting with a surprise. She felt confused, curious, and strangely excited. She quickly tied her hair and stepped outside, expecting to see something simple, like maybe a coffee he brought for her or a quick friendly visit. But when she opened the door, she froze. Keanu was standing beside a black SUV with a calm smile, holding 2 travel bags. He looked peaceful but also a little nervous, as if he was not sure how she would react. Behind him, the morning sky was bright and the air felt clean, like the start of a new chapter she did not know she needed. Sandra laughed softly, trying to hide the sudden wave of emotion she felt. She asked him what he was doing. He told her they were going on a short trip, nothing too dramatic, just a quiet place in the mountains where the air was clean and the world slowed down a little. She looked at him with wide eyes because she had not expected anything like this. She asked him why he was doing it. He said he felt she needed a break, and he admitted he needed one too. The honesty in his voice made her heart soften. She wanted to say yes immediately, but she paused because she had never let herself imagine something so spontaneous with him. Their friendship was always steady, respectful, kind, and gentle, but this trip suddenly felt like something more. She tried to calm her thoughts and reminded herself that it was just a friendly trip, nothing else, nothing strange, nothing heavy, just a moment to breathe. She agreed to go, and Keanu let out a breath he had been holding without realizing it. He opened the door for her, a small gesture that carried warmth and humility, and she felt her cheeks warm as she stepped inside. He placed the bags in the back, sat in the driver's seat, and started the engine with a soft laugh that made her heart flutter in a way she did not show on her face. As they drove out of the city, the noise slowly faded. Sandra felt the tension in her shoulders loosen little by little. She opened the window slightly to feel the fresh air. Keanu glanced at her from time to time, checking if she was comfortable. He always did that. He always cared in quiet ways. She had noticed it over the years, but now, in the small space of the car, she felt it even more. They talked about simple things at first, like old film stories, funny set memories, and moments they never shared publicly. Slowly, the conversation shifted to deeper topics. Sandra spoke about the fear of slowing down, about wondering if she had given too much of herself to the world. Keanu listened with a calm expression, giving her space to speak without judging anything she said. Then he told her about his own struggles with carrying loss, about how some days felt heavy even when everything looked good from the outside. The car filled with a gentle silence after that, not uncomfortable, just honest. It was the kind of silence that comes when 2 people understand each other's pain without needing big words. After a long drive, they reached the mountain road. The view opened wide, showing rolling hills and tall trees rising like silent guardians. Sandra felt something inside her shift, something soft and hopeful. She closed her eyes for a moment because she felt tears threatening to rise, not from sadness, but from the simple beauty of the moment. Keanu parked the car near a small wooden lodge that looked warm and peaceful. He helped her out and told her he had one more surprise. He took her hand gently, not in a romantic way, but in a steady, reassuring way. The touch sent a small spark through her, and she hoped he did not notice the way she inhaled sharply. He guided her behind the lodge, through a narrow trail covered with soft leaves. After a few minutes, they reached a small open space where the mountain view stretched endlessly. There was a quiet picnic setup waiting for them, with a warm blanket and a basket of food he had prepared with his own hands. Sandra felt her heart twist because she had not expected this level of thoughtfulness. She looked at him with a soft, emotional expression and asked him why he had gone to such effort. Keanu looked at the mountains, then looked at her, and said something that made the air between them feel heavier and more meaningful. He said he wanted to give her a day where she did not have to be strong for anyone. He wanted her to feel safe, calm, and understood. He added that he also needed a place where he could let his guard down without fear. The words settled deep inside her. She felt a warmth she had buried years ago rising again. She sat on the blanket and let the moment wash over her slowly. They ate together, laughed quietly, and enjoyed the stillness that surrounded them. Every little gesture, every shared look, every small laugh felt like another step toward a truth neither of them had dared to face. But as the sun lowered behind the mountains, something changed. Sandra noticed Keanu suddenly fall silent. His jaw tightened slightly, his eyes looked distant. She asked him if he was okay, and he hesitated before answering. He said there was something he had been wanting to tell her for years, something he had kept hidden because he was afraid it would change their friendship forever. Her heartbeat grew quicker, the wind felt colder, the moment felt fragile. She asked him what he meant. Keanu swallowed hard, looked at her with eyes full of emotion, and slowly opened his mouth to speak. And then he stopped. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and whispered that he was not sure she was ready to hear it yet. The air grew still. Sandra felt her chest tighten, and the moment hung between them, heavy and full of tension, leaving her wondering what truth he was holding back and why he suddenly seemed so afraid. The silence after Keanu's unfinished sentence settled between them like a soft but heavy fog that neither of them knew how to move through. Sandra watched the way his hands trembled slightly, something he tried to hide by placing them on his knees. She had known him for years, had seen him in pressure-filled interviews, intense rehearsals, emotional scenes, and quiet moments, but she rarely saw him like this. He looked vulnerable, almost fragile, not because he was weak, but because he was holding something important inside him, something that clearly weighed on him in a way she had never seen before. She leaned closer, her voice soft and steady, asking him gently what truth he thought she was not ready for. Keanu tried to answer again, but his voice cracked in a way that made her heart twist. Instead of speaking, he looked away at the mountains, as if searching for courage in the endless horizon. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Sandra could feel the wind brushing past them, carrying the scent of pine and cold air, as if nature itself was waiting with them. Then Keanu finally whispered that he had made a mistake by bringing it up when the day had been peaceful and calm. He said he did not want to add heaviness to a moment he had hoped would feel warm for both of them. Sandra shook her head and told him that honesty could never ruin a peaceful day, especially not when it came from him. She told him he could trust her, that whatever he was carrying did not have to stay locked inside anymore. Keanu breathed slowly, and for a moment she thought he was finally going to tell her everything. But instead he gave her a gentle smile that did not reach his eyes and said he needed more time. Sandra felt something inside her tighten, not with anger but with worry. She wanted to reach out and take his hand again, but she held back, afraid he might pull away if she pushed too hard. She told him she understood, even though she did not fully understand. Some part of her knew that people like him, people who carried deep wounds, needed time to open doors inside themselves. The sun dipped lower as they packed up the picnic, and the soft golden light wrapped around them like a quiet blessing. They walked back toward the lodge slowly, neither rushing nor speaking much. Sandra kept glancing at Keanu, watching the way he stared at the ground, lost in thoughts he was not ready to share. She wondered what he had been hiding all these years, and why he looked so scared to say it. She knew him to be brave, gentle, humble, and honest, so whatever truth he was holding back must have been something that cut deep inside him. When they reached the lodge, Keanu suggested they go inside for warmth. A small fireplace glowed softly in the corner, filling the room with a comforting orange light. Sandra sat on the couch while Keanu set down the bags. The silence felt thick, but not uncomfortable, just full of unspoken emotions. She watched him carefully. She noticed small details she had never paid attention to before, like the way his shoulders stiffened whenever he felt overwhelmed, or the way he pressed his lips together before choosing his words. He sat across from her with a gentle sigh. She asked if he wanted tea or water or just a moment alone. He shook his head and said he wanted to sit with her. He said the silence felt easier when she was near. The words made her heart feel warm and uncertain at the same time. They talked for a while about the view, the drive, and memories from old films. It was an attempt to lighten the mood, but the truth still hung between them, waiting. Sandra felt herself growing more curious, more worried. She wondered if he had been hurt, if he had lost someone recently, or if he was carrying guilt from something long ago. She did not want to pry, but she could feel that his heart was holding something fragile. Hours passed quietly until night settled around the lodge. The sky outside turned deep blue, dotted with stars that looked close enough to touch. Keanu stood by the window, his silhouette outlined by the moonlight. Sandra approached him slowly, feeling something inside her shift. She touched his arm gently, trying not to startle him. He turned toward her with an expression she could not fully read. She told him that he did not owe her anything, but she also told him she would listen to him for as long as it took. Her voice shook a little, but she did not pull back. He looked into her eyes for a long, quiet moment, and she felt something deep in her chest, something she had been trying to push down for years. Their friendship had always been steady, kind, and respectful, but now she could feel a deeper layer she had never allowed herself to acknowledge. Keanu finally spoke softly, saying that the real reason he wanted the mountain trip was not just to give her peace, but because he needed a space where he could tell her the truth without cameras or noise or pressure. He said he had felt this need growing inside him for months and that he could not ignore it anymore. Her heart began to race. She asked him gently if he could tell her a little piece of it, just enough to help her understand why he looked so troubled. He closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and said that the truth involved her more than anyone else. Her breath caught. She felt the world slow down around her. But then suddenly a loud knock at the lodge door interrupted everything. They both jumped slightly. Sandra looked at Keanu, confused. He whispered that he was not expecting anyone. The knock came again, louder this time. Sandra felt a chill roll down her spine, not from fear but from the sudden shift in energy. Keanu stepped toward the door carefully, his expression alert. Sandra followed behind him with hesitant steps. He opened the door slowly, and the cold night air rushed inside, carrying a sharp chill. Standing outside was a young man dressed in a thick winter jacket, breathing heavily as if he had run a long distance. Keanu greeted him politely but cautiously. The young man said he had come from the nearby ranger station and that he had a message that needed to reach Keanu urgently. Sandra felt her stomach twist because she could tell the message was serious. The man handed Keanu a small, sealed envelope. Keanu looked at it with confusion, then with a growing sense of dread. Sandra watched his hands tremble slightly as he opened it. As he read the message, his face changed slowly, the same way a sky darkens before a storm. The softness in his eyes faded into something heavier, something that made Sandra's heart drop. She asked him what it said, but he did not respond right away. He kept staring at the paper as if he could not believe what he was reading. She touched his arm again, feeling fear rise inside her. Finally, he whispered that the message was about someone from his past, someone he had not spoken about in years, someone connected to the very truth he had almost told her earlier. Sandra felt her breath catch. She asked him who it was. Keanu lowered the paper slowly, looked into her eyes with a mixture of sorrow and fear, and whispered a single name that made the entire room fall silent. But before Sandra could ask anything else, before she could even take a breath, Keanu stepped back from her with a shaky voice and said that everything he had tried to protect might be changing now. He said he needed to think, needed to understand what this message meant. He walked toward the back door of the lodge and stepped outside into the cold night air, leaving Sandra standing alone in the warm glow of the fireplace, her heart twisting with worry and confusion. She stood frozen for a moment, staring at the door he had just walked through. Her mind raced with questions, fears, and strange emotions she did not fully understand. She knew something big had shifted, something she had not been prepared for. And then, as the cold wind drifted in from the open doorway, Sandra realized one thing with painful clarity. The truth Keanu had been hiding was much bigger than she had imagined. The moment the back door closed behind Keanu, a cold and uneasy silence filled the lodge. Sandra stood still, her heart pounding with a mix of confusion and fear she could not explain. The air inside felt heavy now, as if the message he had just received had changed the entire energy of the room. She looked toward the door he had stepped through, hoping he would walk back inside quickly. But the cold mountain wind kept sweeping in instead, carrying a strange quietness that made her chest tighten. She walked slowly toward the doorframe and stared into the darkness outside. The moonlight fell softly over the snow-covered ground, and she could see Keanu's figure standing near the edge of the trees. His back was turned to her, his shoulders tight, his head slightly bowed. He looked like someone trying to hold himself together, someone fighting a storm inside that he had never allowed anyone to see. Sandra wrapped her arms around herself and stepped outside, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. She called his name gently, not wanting to startle him. Keanu turned halfway, and although he tried to force a small smile, it did not reach his eyes. She walked closer, stopping just a few steps behind him. She asked him softly what the message meant and who the name he whispered belonged to. Keanu looked at the snow for a long moment before answering. He said the message was from someone he thought he would never hear from again, someone tied to a past he had tried to leave behind quietly and respectfully. His voice trembled when he said the name again, and this time Sandra heard it clearly. The name carried weight, sadness, and memories he had kept locked away for years. She did not know this person, but she could feel how deeply their existence had shaped Keanu. She told him he did not need to explain everything tonight, but he shook his head slowly. He said he could not hide it anymore. He said he brought her to the mountains to tell her the truth in peace, but he had not expected the truth to follow him here so suddenly. Sandra stepped closer, close enough to see the hurt behind his calm expression. She wanted to comfort him, but she knew Keanu was careful with his emotions, always humble, always gentle, always respectful. She told him he could say whatever he needed to say and that she would not judge him. He nodded, took a long breath, and finally turned to face her fully. He told her that years ago, before one of the biggest turning points in his life, he had made a promise to someone he cared about deeply. It was a promise to protect something important, something he had carried alone because he thought it was the only way to keep that person's last wish alive. The name he spoke belonged to someone who had been part of his life before the world knew much about him, someone he had loved not romantically, but with deep loyalty and respect. Sandra listened carefully, feeling the heaviness of his words. She could tell this promise had shaped more of his choices than he ever admitted. She asked him what the message said. He hesitated again before revealing that something connected to that old promise had resurfaced, something he never expected to face again. He said the message warned him that a piece of his past was no longer buried. He said the ranger who delivered the envelope did not even know what it meant, only that someone had insisted it reach Keanu immediately. Sandra felt a chill run down her spine, not because she was afraid of danger, but because she sensed this truth had the power to shake the foundation of Keanu's heart. She reached out slowly and touched his arm, telling him he did not have to carry this alone anymore. He lowered his gaze, and she could see the silent struggle inside him. For years, Keanu had been known for his kindness, humility, and resilience, but she realized now that those qualities came from wounds he rarely showed. Keanu finally spoke again, his voice low and almost breaking. He said the truth he had wanted to tell her earlier was tied to that old promise. He said he had kept certain feelings locked away, certain fears buried deep, because he did not want to risk bringing any darkness into her life. He said he had always thought of Sandra as someone who deserved peace and brightness, not heavy stories from the past. The wind curled around them softly as he looked at her, and for a moment Sandra felt time slow. She knew he trusted her, but she did not know the weight of the trust he was giving her now. She stepped closer again, telling him he was not a burden, that his past did not scare her, and that he had every right to speak his truth without fear. Keanu nodded, but before he could speak, a sudden rustling came from the trees behind them. Both of them froze. Sandra instinctively moved closer to him, and Keanu stepped slightly in front of her in a protective way that made her heart twist with a strange mix of fear and comfort. The rustling grew louder, then stopped abruptly. Keanu waited, listening carefully, his breathing steady but alert. After a long moment, a small mountain fox emerged from the shadows, sniffing the air before darting away. Sandra exhaled with relief, and Keanu finally relaxed his shoulders, offering a small laugh. She laughed softly too, but the moment reminded them how fragile the night felt. They walked back inside the lodge, and Keanu closed the door carefully. The warmth from the fireplace touched their cold skin, and Sandra felt a wave of tenderness when she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. She asked if he wanted to sit or rest, but he said he wanted to keep talking because he did not want to lose the courage he had gathered. They sat on the couch, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The fire crackled softly beside them. Keanu took a deep breath and began explaining the truth he had held for years. He told her that the promise he made was connected to someone who had believed in him when he was young, someone who had given him guidance, strength, and emotional support at a time when he felt lost. This person had carried a secret they entrusted to him alone. Keanu paused, looking at the fire as if replaying pieces of his past. He said the message implied that someone else now knew about the secret, someone who should never have known. Sandra asked quietly what the secret was, but he shook his head again, saying he was still trying to understand if it was safe to reveal it. The promise was complicated, tied to loyalty and respect. He said he wanted to protect the truth because it did not belong to him alone. Sandra felt empathy rise inside her. She placed her hand gently on his, and this time he did not pull away. He looked at their hands for a moment, then lifted his eyes to hers with a soft expression that made her heart warm and ache at the same time. He told her there was another part to the truth, a part that involved her. She felt her breath catch. He said he had been carrying feelings he never intended to reveal, feelings he tried to bury because of timing, fear, and respect. He said he had spent years avoiding the full weight of those feelings, but they had never fully disappeared. Sandra felt the room tilt slightly, her heartbeat growing faster. She whispered his name softly. He opened his mouth to say more, his eyes full of emotion. But at that exact moment, the lodge lights flickered once, twice, then went completely out. The room fell into darkness. The fireplace still glowed faintly, casting shadows on the walls, but everything else became quiet and cold. Sandra grabbed Keanu's arm, startled. He stood quickly, his protective instincts immediately taking over. He told her to stay close as he looked toward the windows. Outside, the mountain wind grew stronger. The trees shifted in the darkness. Something felt different now, not dangerous but unsettling, as if the night itself carried a message. Sandra whispered that maybe the power went out from the weather, but Keanu shook his head slowly. He said mountain lodges usually had backup generators that kept the lights stable. He walked toward the window and peered outside. The sky was darker than before. The wind was sharper. And in the distance, down the long mountain road, Keanu saw something that made him inhale sharply. A second envelope pinned under a stone, right in the center of the path. Someone had been there, recently. He turned toward Sandra with a look she had never seen on his face before, a mixture of fear, urgency, and the weight of a truth he could no longer delay. Sandra felt a cold shiver move across her spine as she watched Keanu staring out the window. The glow from the fireplace lit the side of his face, and she could see the tension tightening along his jaw. Whatever he saw outside had shaken him in a way she had never witnessed before. She stepped closer, her voice soft and uncertain as she asked him what was out there. Keanu did not speak right away. He kept looking at the path, frozen, as if he was trying to decide whether to tell her or to protect her from something he feared would overwhelm her. Finally, he told her there was another envelope waiting outside, pinned under a stone in the center of the road leading to the lodge. Sandra felt her breath catch. The first envelope had already shaken him, but a second one, delivered silently in the dark without footsteps or warnings, felt different. It felt intentional. It felt personal. Keanu stepped back from the window and ran a hand through his hair. Sandra watched his movements, noticing the way his hands trembled slightly and the way his breathing grew uneven. She asked him if the envelope could be from the same person who sent the first message. Keanu nodded slowly, but there was a look in his eyes that suggested the message might be even more urgent. He moved toward the door, and Sandra immediately reached for his arm, asking him not to go outside alone. He paused, turned to her, and offered a small, gentle smile that carried both gratitude and concern. He told her he would not let anything happen to her, and that he needed to retrieve the envelope because leaving it outside felt like giving fear too much power. He promised he would only walk a few steps from the door. Sandra hesitated, but she nodded. She told him she would stay close and keep the door half open so he could hear her if anything felt wrong. Keanu squeezed her hand softly before stepping out into the cold night. Sandra held her breath as she watched him walk slowly toward the stone on the path. The snow crunched under his feet in a steady rhythm, each step echoing in the quiet mountain air. The moonlight fell over him, outlining his figure in a silver glow. He knelt down and picked up the envelope carefully, looking around the trees with alert eyes. Sandra leaned out the doorway, her heart pounding. She wanted him to hurry, not because she was afraid of danger, but because the darkness felt full of too many unknowns now. Keanu returned quickly and closed the door behind him. He held the envelope tightly, and Sandra could see the way his fingers pressed into the paper. He walked back toward the fireplace where there was enough light to see. Sandra stood beside him as he opened it. Inside there was another note, written in the same handwriting as the first one, simple and direct, but filled with a kind of weight that made Sandra's stomach twist. Keanu read it silently first. His face changed again, tightening with a mixture of disbelief and pain. Sandra asked him what it said. He hesitated for a moment, then read it aloud in a quiet, strained voice. It said, "The promise you made is no longer yours to carry. The truth must be spoken. She deserves to know." Sandra felt her heart drop. She looked at Keanu, trying to understand the meaning behind the words. He slowly lowered the note and looked at her with eyes full of sorrow, fear, and something deeper she could not name. He whispered that the message confirmed everything he had been afraid of. The past he had tried to keep quiet was no longer letting him stay silent. It was now pushing him, demanding him, to reveal the truth he had been hiding. Sandra sat down beside him on the couch, feeling her chest tighten. She asked him again, gently but firmly, what truth he had been carrying all these years. Keanu sat down slowly, his posture tense. He stared at the fire for a long time, as if gathering his strength. Finally, he began to speak. He told her about a person he had known many years ago, someone who had been like a mentor, a protector, and a voice of wisdom in his life. This person had taught him to move with humility, to heal quietly, and to treat people with respect. Before this person passed away, they entrusted Keanu with a truth that was meant to protect someone else. Someone connected to both their lives in a way that was powerful but complicated. Sandra listened closely, feeling her heart race as each piece of his story unfolded. She asked him if the person he needed to protect was still alive. Keanu nodded slowly. He said the person was someone he had crossed paths with many years ago, someone he had always held respect for, someone who had shaped a part of his emotional journey without even knowing it. Sandra felt confused, unsure what he meant. She asked him directly who the truth was meant to protect. He looked at her with eyes full of emotion and whispered, "You." The word hit her like a soft shock. She stared at him, unsure if she had heard correctly. She asked him again, slower this time. He repeated it. He said the truth was meant to protect her, that the person from his past had left him with a final request tied to the way he saw Sandra, the way he cared for her, and the connection they shared long before either of them truly understood it. Sandra felt her heartbeat grow wild, her breath shaky. She asked him why someone from his past would feel the need to protect her. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, as if fighting his own emotions, and then opened them again. He said the person had seen something in him years ago, something he had denied, something he had run from because he was afraid he would not be enough. This person had told him that one day he would meet someone who brought light back into places he had forgotten, someone who would calm his storms without trying, someone who would understand him in ways he never expected, someone gentle, strong, patient, and kind. Sandra stared at him silently, her heart trembling. He said the person believed that when he met this someone, he would finally understand what it meant to be seen fully. And according to this person, that someone was Sandra. Sandra felt tears sting at the corners of her eyes. Her throat tightened. She whispered that she had never known anything about this. Keanu nodded. He said he had kept it hidden because he never wanted to make her feel pressured, afraid, or overwhelmed. He said he did not want to disrupt her life or her choices. He wanted to remain a peaceful part of her world, not a heavy one. Sandra wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, telling him he was not heavy. He looked at her with a soft, vulnerable expression that made her heart ache even more. She asked him what the last part of the promise was, what truth he had been holding back from her for so long. Keanu opened his mouth to answer, but his voice faltered. He swallowed hard. He looked down at the second message in his hand. Then he looked back at her. He told her the promise required him to stay silent until the day came when the truth would no longer harm her, but instead help her grow. He said he had been waiting for that moment, unsure if it would ever come. He had hoped he would one day be brave enough to tell her everything himself, but he had never been able to gather the courage. Sandra whispered, shaking, that she was ready to hear it now. Keanu looked into her eyes with a softness that made her breath tremble. He whispered that the truth was tied not only to his past, but to the way he felt about her. She felt her entire world shift slightly, as if the ground beneath her moved. She told him he could tell her anything. She promised him she would listen without judgment. Keanu took a deep breath, and just as he finally began to speak, a loud crack echoed from outside the lodge. They both jumped to their feet. The sound was sharp and sudden, like something heavy breaking in the forest. Sandra grabbed Keanu's arm instinctively. Keanu stepped protectively in front of her, his eyes locked on the door. The wind outside shifted and the trees rustled in an eerie rhythm. Then, from the darkness, a shadow moved across the window. Slow, deliberate, unmistakable, Keanu's entire body tensed. Sandra felt her pulse race uncontrollably. Someone or something was outside the lodge, and they were not alone anymore. The moment the shadow crossed the window, Sandra felt her breath freeze in her chest. The glow from the fireplace flickered across the wooden walls, making everything inside the lodge feel smaller and tighter. Keanu stepped a little closer to the window, his shoulders tense, his posture alert in a way she had never seen before. She grabbed his sleeve without thinking, her fingers trembling slightly, and he placed his hand over hers for a brief second, grounding her before slowly pulling away to focus. The wind whistled against the glass, but the sound of the shadow moving had been different, heavier, more deliberate. It was not the soft, quick motion of an animal. It felt like someone pacing near the lodge, waiting for something or someone. Keanu walked toward the window carefully and tilted his head slightly to catch the angle of the moonlight. He whispered that he could not see the shape clearly. Sandra stood a few steps behind him, afraid to get too close but too worried to stay away. The silence outside felt unnatural, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. After a long moment, Keanu stepped away from the window and told Sandra they needed to stay calm. He said the shadow could have been nothing more than a passing traveler or a ranger checking the area during the power outage. But Sandra could hear the hesitation in his voice. He did not fully believe his own words. The second envelope on the road had already made it clear that someone knew exactly where they were. Someone who had been close enough to leave messages without being seen. Someone who knew Keanu well enough to evoke his past. Sandra's heart beat faster. She asked him quietly if the person who left the envelopes might be outside now. Keanu inhaled slowly before answering. He said it was possible, and the possibility alone was enough to send a ripple of fear through her. He moved toward the door and checked the lock, then checked the windows. His movements were not panicked, but careful, protective, steady. She watched him with an ache inside her chest, knowing he was doing everything he could to keep her safe. When he returned to her side, she asked him softly if the shadow had anything to do with the truth he had been trying to tell her. Keanu sighed deeply, the kind of sigh that sounded like it carried years of weight. He said he was starting to believe that the past he had tried so hard to guard was no longer content to stay hidden. He said the mountain trip, which he had hoped would bring them peace and clarity, had somehow turned into the moment everything unraveled at once. They sat back down near the fire, trying to steady their thoughts. Keanu reached for the two envelopes and placed them gently on the table in front of them. The firelight danced across the paper, casting long shadows. The first envelope had shaken him, the second one had pushed him, but the movement outside had made something clear. They could not keep ignoring the truth that was trying to surface. Sandra looked at him with soft, worried eyes. She asked him again, gently but firmly, what the truth was. She told him she could handle anything, that she trusted him more than he realized. Keanu rested his elbows on his knees and lowered his head for a moment. When he lifted it again, she could see the vulnerability in his expression, the kind of vulnerability that came only when someone was about to reveal something they had held inside for far too long. He told her the promise he made was not just about protecting her future, but about protecting her past as well. Sandra blinked in confusion. She asked him what that meant. He explained that years ago, long before either of them understood how deep their connection truly ran, someone had seen how their lives would eventually intersect. This person had warned him that Sandra might carry emotional wounds she did not recognize at the time. Wounds from pressure, from expectations, from the weight of being strong for everyone else. Sandra felt her chest tighten. She knew she had carried emotional wounds, some she never voiced, but she had always assumed they were hers alone to handle, never someone else's burden to protect. She asked Keanu why the person had involved him in her journey, especially when she had not even known him that closely back then. Keanu's eyes softened. He said the person had seen something in him, something about the way he moved through the world with kindness, patience, humility, and a quiet strength that made people feel safe. They believed he was someone who could understand her without demanding anything from her. They believed he was someone who could be a steady presence in her life when it mattered most, even if neither of them realized it at first. Sandra felt tears rise in her eyes. She whispered that she never knew anyone cared about her in a way that involved such deep thought. Keanu smiled gently and said she had touched more lives than she realized, including his. He said being connected to her had changed him, helped him grow, helped him open up to the world again after years of protecting himself from heartbreak and loss. He told her she had brought light into places inside him he had forgotten about. She wiped her tears slowly, trying not to let them fall too quickly. She asked him again what the final truth was, the one he had been scared to say, the one the messages demanded he reveal. He looked at her with eyes full of emotion, eyes that seemed to carry years of unsaid words. He opened his mouth to speak, his voice unsteady. But then the wind outside shifted suddenly, slamming something against the side of the lodge with a loud thud. Sandra gasped. Keanu stood up immediately. The fire flickered violently, making the shadows on the walls dance like moving figures. The sound had been too sharp to be the wind alone. Keanu walked toward the nearest window and tried to look out, but the darkness was too thick. Then, from the far end of the cabin, a faint tapping sound echoed against the glass. Not the sound of a branch, not the sound of an animal. It was too rhythmic, too intentional. Tap, pause, tap, tap. Sandra covered her mouth with her hand, her breath trembling. Keanu whispered for her to stay behind him as he moved carefully toward the sound. He stepped closer to the window, trying to make out the shape beyond the glass. The tapping continued, the rhythm steady and deliberate. Tap, pause, tap, tap. Keanu leaned in slightly, squinting into the darkness. And suddenly, a folded piece of white paper slid slowly up against the outside of the window, pressed by a hand they could not see clearly in the darkness. Sandra gasped and stepped back. Keanu froze for a moment, his breath caught. The hand released the paper, letting it slip a little, still held in place by the cold glass. Then the shadow behind it disappeared into the darkness without a sound. Keanu did not move, neither did she. For several seconds, they simply stared at the paper through the window, their hearts pounding. Finally, Keanu stepped forward and opened the window just enough to pull the paper inside. He closed it quickly and locked it again. He unfolded the note with trembling hands. Sandra watched his face as he began to read. His expression changed slowly, first confusion, then disbelief, then something deeper, something close to heartbreak. He lowered the paper, looked at her with eyes that shimmered in the firelight, and said with a trembling voice, "This one is not about the past. It is about now." Sandra felt her knees weaken. She asked him what it said. Keanu swallowed hard, then whispered, "It says the truth I've been hiding from you is no longer mine to protect. It says the reason I've held back all these years is standing right in front of me. It says I need to tell you before sunrise." Sandra's heart pounded so hard she thought he might hear it. She whispered, barely able to breathe, "Keanu, what truth?" Keanu looked at her with eyes full of emotion, stepped closer, lifted his hand halfway as if wanting to touch her but not daring to finish the motion. And then, with a trembling voice, he whispered the beginning of the truth. "The person I've been protecting you from is someone you trusted deeply." Sandra's entire body froze, her breath caught in her throat, her world tilted. And before she could ask a single question, the lights flickered again, the fire cracked, and a heavy knock echoed through the lodge door, slow, forceful, and unmistakably human. The heavy knock echoed through the lodge with a force that made Sandra's entire body tense. The sound felt different from the tapping they had heard earlier. This knock was slow, deliberate, and strong, as if the person on the other side wanted them to know they were not going away. Sandra stepped back instinctively, her heart pounding. Keanu moved in front of her without hesitation, shielding her with his body in a protective gesture that sent a deep wave of emotion through her chest. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The fire crackled softly, the wind whispered outside, and the moonlight filtered through the window in pale beams. Keanu's breathing steadied, but Sandra could feel the tension in his posture. She whispered his name, asking him what they should do. Keanu looked at her briefly, his eyes full of calm despite the fear surrounding them. He told her to stay behind him, no matter what. The knock came again, one slow, heavy thud that seemed to shake the floorboards beneath them. Keanu walked toward the door cautiously, stopping just a few steps away. He called out, asking who was there. The voice on the other side answered softly, almost whispering, but with enough clarity that both of them heard it. The voice said, "I'm not here to harm you. I only need to speak to Keanu." Sandra felt a chill move across her skin. The tone was familiar to Keanu. She could tell by the way his shoulders stiffened. He inhaled slowly, then exhaled as if preparing himself for something he had been avoiding for years. He told Sandra to stand by the fireplace and stay quiet until he understood who the visitor was. She hesitated, then nodded, trusting him even though her heart was pounding wildly. Keanu unlocked the door but opened it only an inch, letting the cold night air slip inside. When he saw the face on the other side, Sandra watched the shock ripple through his expression. The door opened slightly wider, revealing an older man dressed in a heavy coat, his hair gray and his eyes filled with sadness and urgency. The man spoke Keanu's name gently. Keanu whispered the man's name back, and Sandra realized this visitor was someone from Keanu's past, someone deeply tied to the promise he had carried for so long. Keanu stepped aside and allowed the man to enter, closing the door behind him. Sandra stood near the fire, unsure whether to feel relieved or more afraid. The older man removed his gloves slowly, his face lined with exhaustion. He looked at Sandra with a soft, respectful gaze and apologized for the fear he might have caused. He said he had no intention of frightening them, but he had spent days searching for Keanu and needed him to hear something important before it was too late. Keanu guided him closer to the fire. Sandra watched the way Keanu's posture shifted, not relaxed, not defensive, but something in between, like he was torn between the past and the present. She could sense the weight in the air, the tension of something long buried finally rising. The man looked at Keanu and said he had been the closest friend to the mentor Keanu had spoken about, the same person who entrusted Keanu with the promise before passing away. He explained that he had been searching for Keanu because a final message from the mentor had been found, a message that had never reached Keanu because it had been lost in a stack of old belongings. Sandra held her breath as Keanu listened quietly, his eyes soft but heavy. The man said the mentor's final message revealed the full truth, a truth Keanu had only known half of, a truth he had been trying to protect Sandra from without knowing the entire story. Sandra stepped closer, unable to remain silent. She asked softly what the message said. The older man looked at her gently, then back at Keanu. He said the mentor had seen, years before either of them realized it themselves, that Keanu and Sandra shared a rare connection, an emotional language only they could understand. He believed their bond had the power to heal parts of both of them. But he also believed Sandra carried emotional wounds that could make her vulnerable to people who pretended to support her, but secretly drained her energy and joy. The man looked at Sandra with compassion and told her something she did not expect. "Someone close to you," he said softly, "someone you trusted, was hurting you without your knowledge." Sandra felt her stomach drop. She asked him who. The man hesitated, then said the name Sandra had not expected to hear. It was someone she had worked with for years, a manager who had always claimed to care about her career, someone she had trusted to guide her decisions, someone who had often warned her about letting people get too close, someone who had tried, subtly but steadily, to keep Keanu at a distance. Sandra staggered back slightly, the revelation hitting her like a cold wave. She remembered moments, comments, decisions she had agreed with out of exhaustion or misplaced trust. She remembered the quiet warnings disguised as advice. She felt her breath tremble as she looked at Keanu. Keanu stepped closer, his expression gentle and protective. He said he had known for years that something felt wrong, but the promise kept him from saying anything until he was certain. He said he had sensed that the person guiding her was pulling her away from people who genuinely cared about her. He said he had stayed silent not because he did not care, but because he was afraid speaking out would cause Sandra pain. Sandra felt tears slipping down her cheeks. She whispered that she wished he had told her sooner. Keanu's eyes softened with guilt and emotion. He said he wanted to, but he feared being wrong and feared hurting her more by interfering. He said he wanted her happiness more than anything, even if it meant staying silent. The older man placed a hand on Keanu's shoulder and told him the mentor's final message, said the time had come for the truth to be spoken, not out of anger, but out of love. The final line of the message, the man said, was meant for Keanu alone. He handed Keanu a folded piece of paper. Keanu opened it slowly, his hands shaking. He read it silently, and tears filled his eyes. Sandra stepped closer, her heart aching to know what it said. Keanu handed her the note with trembling fingers. She read the simple, emotional words, "Protect her, but do not hide from her. Your hearts speak the same language." When fear keeps you silent, love becomes louder. Tell her the truth, not about the world, but about your heart. Sandra felt something inside her break open. She looked at Keanu, tears streaming down her face. Keanu stepped closer, his own eyes wet, his voice unsteady as he whispered the truth he had been holding back for years. He told her he had cared for her in a quiet, steady way for a long time. Not loud, not dramatic, but deep and honest. He said he had never wanted to complicate her life or pressure her. He said he just wanted her to feel safe, understood, and valued. He said the mountain trip was his way of giving her a moment of peace, and maybe a moment of courage, for both of them. Sandra wiped her tears and stepped closer until she was right in front of him. She told him that she had felt something too, something soft, something gentle, something she had tried to push down because of fear and timing and the pressure of the world around them. She told him she had always felt safe with him, even in silence. She said the truth did not scare her anymore. Keanu reached for her hand slowly, as if giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their hands met in the soft glow of the fire. The older man stepped back quietly, giving them space. Keanu whispered with a trembling voice, "I never wanted to lose you." Sandra whispered back, "You never did." The storm outside softened. The wind settled. The mountains grew quiet again, as if the world finally exhaled. Keanu pulled Sandra into a gentle embrace, and she rested her head against his shoulder, feeling a warmth that washed away years of confusion and silence. They stood together in the soft, crackling glow of the fire, finally free of the truth that had weighed on both their hearts. The older man left them with a quiet nod, stepping back into the night, his mission complete. Keanu and Sandra stayed by the fire until morning, talking softly, honestly, openly, without fear and without hiding. The weight that once lived between them dissolved into something calm, something hopeful. When dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in soft gold and pink, Keanu looked at Sandra with gentle eyes and whispered, "Everything changed tonight." And Sandra, with a soft smile full of peace and understanding, replied, "For the better." And for the first time in a long time, they both felt free.